Do. There we go. All right. Let's see. Testing. All right. Welcome in, everyone. Let's see. Hopefully we can have some good conversations today. Had some really great ones yesterday. But welcome, Mock. Welcome, Fire Ninja. Glad y'all could make it. All right. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Welcome in, Dill Pickle. Hope everyone's having a good Wednesday. But yeah, if you're over the age of 18 and looking to have a conversation to help work through an argument that you have, whether it's for or against theism, or you just have a general question for Christianity, philosophy, or Catholicism, feel free to request up. But let's see. Welcome in, Roman Road. I haven't heard of nomological harmony. So I'm not sure. The request button should be the two people you see on the bottom right next to the chat. That will, I think it's blue and pink.
Hello.
Hello. How old are you?
I'm 19.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm a Christian.
All right. And what brings you up here today?
I think I made an argument for God that I wanted to run.
Okay.
Yeah, so first of all, we're going to define change as actualization of potential.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and then we're going to do the premises. So premise one, everything that is changing is being changed or is dependent on another.
Is everything that is changing is
being changed or is dependent on another.
Mm-hmm.
Premise two, something cannot be in the state of both potential and actual at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Premise three, this leads to a long chain of actualizers.
Okay.
Premise 4, however, this chain of actualizers cannot be infinite.
All right.
Conclusion, there is a first mover that initiated change but itself cannot and is not changed, which we call God.
All right. So, changes the actualization of potential. P1, everything that is changing is being changed or dependent on another. P2, something cannot be in the state of both potential and actual at the same time. P3, this leads to a long chain of actualizers. P4, this chain cannot be infinite. Conclusion, there is a first mover that initiated change that itself is unchanged, which we call God. So I'm assuming this is inspired from Thomas Aquinas's argument from motion.
Yeah, I kind of just used that and the Kalam cosmological, combined them and made it like easier.
Okay. So a couple of things here. Are you familiar with B theory of time?
Yes, where like all we're kind of just on a timeline and everything exists and we're kind of just like flowing through it.
So what that means then, because B theory is basically at this point, due to how solid and how accepted um, special relativity is and general relativity, it necessarily leads to B theory. And if B theory is true, then that means everything is actualized. So the definition you give here of changes the actualization of potential, it runs into issues with the understanding of B theory. Now, I am currently working on and looking at to see if there's maybe a way to save the type of language in a B theory style universe, but just keep in mind that the way that the current cosmological models are, the this language doesn't seem to work, at least for most individuals.
Wait, but does B theory of time kind of assume that there's only one possible future?
So that future is already actualized, yes. Now, that runs into an issue if you hold to a libertarian free will. I hold to compatibilist free will, very similar to Leibniz, who is a Christian, holds to a compatibilist view of free will, who holds to that even if we can predict or know the choice is still a free act. So the way that I like to describe it is, if God is outside of time and experiencing all of time and sees the entire timeline, then he knows what you will do, not because he predicted what you would do, but because he's able to see 20 minutes into the future and see your choice, because it's just as real 20 minutes in the future as right now. So because of that, you can still have free will in a B theory universe, just not libertarian free will. And if the future is actualized, which B theory entails, then you can't have change be the actualization of potential as you've defined it. So you're going to run into that issue.
But I have a question though. Like God, like I understand like he knows every future, but I don't think he knows which future is gonna occur, right? I think he knows every possible future, and we have free will to choose which future it could happen.
That would then entail that either his knowledge changes, or if that God doesn't know everything.
Well, yeah, because I don't think, like, isn't it illogical to know something that's completely random?
Well, that's what I'm saying is, I don't So the reason why I don't hold to libertarian free will is, like, as you kind of implied it, um, libertarian free will kind of implies randomness. But you and I, we're reasonable in people, right?
Hmm.
And we are created as rational beings. We have rationality as part of our soul. We have rational souls, right?
Yes.
So because of that, would you not expect there to be reasons behind our choices, behind our actions?
Correct. Yeah.
So then why would it be random?
Well, because we have free will, right?
But like I said, our free will is informed by our knowledge and our rationality. So
Oh, right. Okay.
why would it be random?
Um,
Look into something called compatibilism. Compatibilism is the position that free will does exist even if there are reasons or predictions being able to be made about those choices.
right, right. I think, yeah, obviously there's choices that are more likely to occur than other choices. But that choice still does exist, and
Mm-hmm.
there is a possible world where I can do that choice
Mm-hmm.
that is unlikely, I guess, right?
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is let's say even if the likelihood of you choosing otherwise is zero, like um could you choose to do self-harm? Sure. But would you ever? Probably not, to the point where it's zero if you're in good uh have
Mental
good,
state.
yeah, good mental state, and you have good control of your reasons. So could you choose to do that? Maybe, sure. But would you ever choose to do that? Probably not. So
Right. So
free.
I think God, like, I agree. I think we don't have infinite choice. We have a finite amount of choices that we can make. But I think God knows every one of those possible choices that you can make. But I don't think He knows which choice could possibly happen because
Then he's
I
not
don't know if that would,
omniscient. And
because I think like God can do anything that's logically possible. I don't think it's logical for Him to know like a 50-50 shot, like choice.
so then there are things that God doesn't know. So,
Things that are like logically impossible.
well, no, what I'm
Like I don't
saying,
think He can.
is if you hold to the fact that God cannot predict or know what our future choice is, this leads to one of two things. Either presentism is true and the future doesn't exist, which contradicts science.
Like a theory of time, I believe.
There's different ways to present a theory of time, but yeah, basically that. Or
Mhm.
so like I said, it either contradicts science, and I am of the position that if God created reality and created the universe, and science is the study of the universe, then science and faith can never and will never contradict when properly understood. Because otherwise, what you're implying, if you say that science contradicts faith or faith contradicts science, is that God can deceive, which leads into a whole lot of other issues. So
Mhm.
any and even as a Catholic, that's something that the Catholic Church professes and holds as well, is that if it seems like science and faith contradict, either science is misunderstood, the deposit of faith is misunderstood, or both. But they can never be in true contradiction with each other. So any worldview that leads to a contradiction to science, I dismiss. And I then abstain making judgment on the position until further information is provided. Um, the second thing, as to God, not knowing what our choice is, how then was he able to then predict the coming of Christ? How then was he able to predict all of these future events that are dependent on people's making choices to bring those events to come about?
Right. I think those would have happened in every possible future, right?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. So, but the problem then is that if you're saying that God wouldn't be able to know what our choices are, but the reason why he was able to predict it is because of those choices are set and they are the only outcome, then that seems to indicate that it wasn't free. So that's where the compatibilism comes in. A lot of people, when they think of free will, they hold to intuitively at first glance something that's called libertarian free will, but that runs into a
Hmm.
lot of issues, um, especially when you're talking about either B theory of time or God's omniscience, because if God doesn't know what your choice is, then he can't be all knowing. And if God cannot change because he is outside of time and time is the measurement of change, then that means that he can't gain new knowledge. And then finally, if again, and this kind of goes into it, if B theory is true and God exists outside of the block of time, then that means he already sees the entire block. And so he sees 20 minutes into the future, and it's as real to him as this moment in time is as real to you and me.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, so other than that, also, so the thing is, B theory of time, like things still depend on each other to change, correct?
So that's what I'm saying is like it's going to depend on what you mean by change. If change is the actualization of potentials, then when we're looking at it from the entire worldview, there are no potentialities. Everything is actualized. So
Well,
that's
okay, so for example, like say that I have a pot of water, it needs the fire to boil,
Yeah.
right?
So that gets in. So that's now a different understanding of change, and this is the understanding of change as I currently understand it with B theory. Change is the difference between moments, and it's what time
Mm-hmm.
is measuring. So it's not necessarily the actualization of potential. I am currently not sure if the language of potentiality can be saved in B theory. It might, and I'm currently looking into that, but I'm not sure if the Aristotelian language and Aristotelian understanding of potentiality can exist. Can it exist in the same way that we might talk about the movement of time and we're talking about it from our perspective? Sure. But this type of argument is trying to take a large step back from everything. And when you move so far back, there is no potentiality once you've taken the step to that length. Um, the other thing is, especially for P3 and P4, you want so
Mm-hmm.
I understand you were trying to appeal to infinite regress. Infinite
Right.
regress is not saying that the chain itself cannot be infinite. The way that Thomas Aquinas presents his arguments, because he was of the position that one could not prove or demonstrate through science alone whether or not the universe had a finite past or an infinite past.
Mm-hmm.
And he acknowledged that if he thought there was something inherently logically problematic with an infinite past, he would have presented it. But he didn't see one inherently to it. He believed that the universe having a first moment or a beginning is an article of faith. We only know that because God revealed that to us. So he created his arguments to work whether or not the chain is infinitely long or finite.
Mm.
So what the infinite regress then is talking about isn't whether or not the chain is infinite or not, but rather if the nature of the chain being infinite can explain the existence of the chain in the first place. For example, um, you know 2 plus 2 equals 4, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Now, there are people out there who say that in order to claim that you know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, you have to know that you know 2 plus 2 equals 4. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay. But wait a minute. Now you need to know that you know that you know 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Because you
Oh.
knowing that you know is a new knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But wait a minute. Now you need to know that you know that you know that you know. That's the what's called a nowadays a vicious infinite regress. And so what Thomas Aquinas is saying, all right, so we've now gotten this chain that's infinitely long. At any point
Right.
have we explained the existence of the chain in and of itself? Like it's fine if the chain is infinitely long. That's not the problem.
Like, why is there something and not nothing?
Basically, yeah. So we have chain link 1. All right. Well, what explains chain link 1? Well, it's chain link 2. Okay. Well, what explains chain link 2? Well, chain link 3. Okay. And how many chain links are there? Infinitely. And do any of them ever explain the entirety of the thing? Well, no, they each explain only the prior one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the infinite regress. Not saying that things can't be infinite, but that there needs to be a termination in an explanation. Because otherwise we run into that I know 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 infinitely.
Mm-hmm. I also did have some kind of analogy for the infinite regress that I feel like that's an argument that I thought of as well.
Okay.
It's kind of another syllogism kind of thing. So let's say we have a domino on a
Mm-hmm.
flat floor with negligible forces. That domino can't knock itself over, correct?
Correct.
So, and then what if we put another domino behind it that also can't knock itself over?
Mm-hmm. So
So
and
now,
you are so and I've run this analogy before, and you are touching on it, but the purpose, the thing that you have to overcome is the non-believer is just going to say, well, no, no, no. We see a fallen domino. We don't see a domino standing up. We see a fallen domino. And so now we have to ask what caused it to fall. Oh, the preceding domino. And we see that that one has also fallen. And so
yeah,
that's what the type of infinite regress. It still is an infinite regress, but a lot of people equate explaining the current state is the same as explaining the existence of the state in totality. So
like they just say that the dominoes are falling, and that's just a brute fact.
basically, the analogy that I like to describe it is all they see is the engine of a car. Now, this isn't trying to say that they are ignoring, like they do have good responses to, um, like the watchmaker argument and things like that. But this is just to kind of help make you understand where they're coming from. So they have the engine of a car, and that's all they see. They are able to explain every single aspect of how the engine works perfectly. And at no point in
Mm-hmm.
their explanation of the engine did they ever need to rely on an engineer. And then all of a sudden you come along and say, well, no, 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 no. You need an engineer to explain the fact that this engine works. And they're like, why? I'm able to explain how the engine works without the engineer. So what you've got to do, especially for like what these arguments are trying to do, is acknowledge, yes, you are able to perfectly explain the relationship of these things perfectly. But that's not the question I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking. I am asking a different question. How did these relations come to exist in the first place? Can these relations explain their own existence? Which is a
I don't.
completely different set of questions altogether.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
once you come to that understanding of, oh, the distinction between able to explain the relationships, which is what the atheists are focused on, and
Mm-hmm.
why those relationships exist in the first place, once you realize those are two very different questions, you're going to have a little bit of a better job in formatting your arguments, and the dialectic, and when people are talking past each other, is going to make a lot more sense to you. So that's what I would recommend is one, just recognize that people aren't going to accept your definition of change, especially with the Aristotelian language, because B theory seems to do away with it. And then the infinite regress, once you understand that it is not talking about denying infinite chains or infinity in and of itself, but rather an infinite series of explanations that never actually explains, and that's what that's critiquing, you're going to have a little bit of an easier time trying to make your point. But that's uh, the path that you're going to have to take as you continue this journey.
Mm-hmm. Also, how about that one philosophical puzzle? Like, if there's an infinite past, then how do we get to the present moment?
So the problem with that is it's assuming that there is something traveling through time, or
Mm-hmm.
that time is something that is moving. The best way to understand it is when you're driving in a car, right? The road looks like it's moving underneath you, right?
Right.
But the road is stationary. What's actually moving is you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's imagine that there is an infinite road, all right?
Right.
And you enter the road at mile marker 17.
Mm-hmm.
And then you travel to mile marker 25. Is that
Wait,
possible?
but no, right? Because what defines mile 17?
Well, no. So what defines um, on the number line of all real numbers, so 0 to, in the positive direction and 0 in the negative direction, what designates 2?
What designates 2 is 2 away from 0?
But 0 isn't like the start. Like if I decided to start at 2 and I wanted to move 2 units positively, now I'm at 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all 2 references is 2 away from a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are traveling through time, we are entering into time at a starting point on the highway. So if time is the highway, because that's what it is in B theory, time is like a highway. And if we're entering time at a particular mile marker 7 is like mile marker 7 in one particular, like it's almost an arbitrary designation, but you are starting at a random point on the mile, and then you travel however many units forward. You are
Mm-hmm.
nothing in reality has ever traversed the infinite timeline.
Wait,
That's
so I'm
that's why
yeah.
the criticism doesn't work, because it only works if we live in a presentism or an A theory of time. It doesn't work because time is a completely different subject entirely in B theory.
But like the thing is, you can't have if it's infinity, then you can't have like I'm a little confused on how can there be a starting.
There's no objective starting point is my point. There is your relative starting point, but there's no starting. What is the starting point on an infinite number line that extends infinitely in all directions?
I don't think there could be one, right?
Well, we do have one: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 infinitely positively, and then 0, -1, -2, -3 in the opposite direction.
Oh,
So
okay.
what's the starting point?
Um, I guess it would be that 1 or 0.
No, that was picked arbitrary. Why couldn't I start at 10 and start counting by 5, starting at 10?
Oh, I guess yeah. I guess you could.
So it's not that there is a objectively or universal starting point for time. in an infinite timeline, but things have a relative starting point and they travel a finite amount of time within the infinite space time.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be the same as you decide arbitrarily, no, I'm going to start counting at 0 and I'll count in units of 1. And someone else says, nah, I'm going to start at 10 and I'll start counting in units of 1.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the criticism that you're talking about, it doesn't work for B theory of time, because time is a way of measuring as opposed
Change.
correct, as opposed to it being something different in A theory, where it is like it's something completely different, like time. If space time, or in A theory, you have the fabric of space and then you have time existing as something else separate from space. But in B theory, space and time are one and the same, where space measures up, down, left, right, and width, forward, back, so to speak. And then time measures a fourth axis, a fourth dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, but it's still a part of the same measuring system. The x-axis doesn't measure the same thing as the y-axis, but they exist on the same measurement system, if that makes sense.
Oh, and and that can go on for infinity, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
So that's why Thomas Aquinas felt like you couldn't prove or disprove that time is infinite or not, but we as Christians accept it as a matter of faith.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so accept it as a matter of faith.
Yep.
You're kind of, you're okay.
Because God revealed that it has a first moment to us, but we can't prove it one way or the other. It's similar to the Trinity. We can't prove the Trinity. We can show how God revealed it to us, but we can't prove it through science.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, there's lots of things that are often misunderstood, especially with infinite regress, that you're already, now that you've grasped that, you're miles ahead of a lot of theists that try to run these types of arguments, as well as the actualization language not necessarily being appropriate for B theory of time.
Mm-hmm. So if I somehow made an argument against B theory of time and make A theory of time,
You would need to disprove special relativity and general relativity, so good luck with that.
well, yeah, I don't think I'd be able to do that. But then, so if it was A theory, then would these premises hold?
You'd have a better job with those premises, yes. But like I said, most atheists that you're going to speak to do not hold to A theory of time, and it's basically A theory has effectively been debunked, and I am not a fan of running arguments that science has debunked.
All right. Well, thank you. This was very informative.
Absolutely. Glad I was able to help.
Yep. Thank you. See you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming up. And just to let you know, Hot Opinion, if I remember correctly, Shadow Slays, who's about to come up, is not a Catholic. Let's see. Yeah. There we go. What's up?
Let me step out of this coffee shop real quick.
Yeah. But yeah.
Thank you. So I'm stepping out.
You're good. You're good. But yeah, good timing, because like I said, I saw in the chat, someone was like, oh my gosh, why do Catholics only have circle jerks? And I'm like, I think shit, if I remember from our last conversation, you're not a believer at all, right?
Yeah. Sorry, my internet's not too good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, this is okay. I think everything's good now. Okay, so I had a question about subjective and objective morality.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I will often hear from people like, "Well, I have objective morality,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm appealing to a standard and things like that." And then I'll usually take the position of, "Well, I believe in subjective morality," and their question to me is often like, what grounds it or justifies it?
Mm-hmm.
And my typical response is reality. That I think
Mm-hmm.
we can have opinions in our mind and concepts and ideas in our mind,
Yeah.
but they're still within existence.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is like, what philosophical framework or like, I mean, I'm also kind of like an existentialist as well, but I'm just barely learning that. My
Yeah.
question really is like, what philosophical framework um, works with like subjective, I guess possibly realism, but
Yeah.
like subjective morality grounded in reality.
Yeah.
Like, what does that sound like to you?
So that sounds like, honestly, objective morality. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So we first need to understand what is meant by something being subjective and objective. And I actually had this conversation with someone, it was either yesterday or the day before, that I think the better language or term we ought to use in this type of conversation is are the morals we follow arbitrary, or are there reasons behind them? Because most of the Christians that you speak to, and based on the language, I think this is where it's coming from, is they hold to divine command theory, and that's where you'll hear a lot of atheists go, "Oh, so your morals are subjective because it's dependent on the mind of God." And if we define subjective and objective as mind dependency, then yes, morals are subjective for the divine command theorist, but so too is our own existence because it's dependent on the mind of God, on the will of God, on the act of God. So then now our own existence is subjective, but that seems crazy to say. So most theists, especially those that are divine command theorists, when they talk about subjective and objective, they mean something that is universally recognized across all minds is objective. So that's why things like math, even though math is a mind-dependent language, its truth is recognized across all minds, so they call it an objective truth. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true under base 10, but false under base 3. I think in base 3, 2 plus 2 equals 11. Just like binary, 1 plus 1 equals 10. So depending on the language system you're using within math, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is either true or false. So it's dependent on the system, on the mind comprising that language system. But the truth of it can be recognized across all minds, so you can call it objective in that sense. And so, ironically enough, I still think the divine command theorist fails under that understanding of objective and subjective, because they hold that God could have declared the moral system otherwise. Therefore, its truth is not universally recognized across all minds. We only know it to be the way that it is because God said it. But regardless of the truth of divine command theory, as someone who holds to natural law theory, which is the position of the Catholic Church, we believe that creation was created in such a way that we can use our natural reason to observe creation and arrive at truths about morality independent of our knowledge of God, because
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
Yeah, I think you're getting to like the law is written on our hearts. Where
Not
is that what you're
quite.
trying to say? Or no?
No. So that's the defense that I'm pointing at is, I am so when I think it was Paul talking about like the law written on our hearts. I've actually got a video on his understanding of it. At the time of Plato, within the Greek philosophical tradition, there was this idea that when you gained knowledge, you weren't actually gaining anything new. You were remembering the forms. You were remembering truths. And so what happened is you just had this information contained inside you, written on your hearts, and then through careful process, all of a sudden you didn't come to new knowledge, but you remembered the knowledge you already had. And so that's the framework that I believe St. Paul is working in when he's talking about knowledge written on your hearts. So I'm not saying that God sat down, wrote down his divine decrees on your hearts, and you know them, but you're ignoring them. No, what that phrase is trying to convey is you have natural reason, and you are able to use your natural reason to look at the natural world around you and come to realizations about moral truths. Often,
our conscience.
Yeah. Well, not even the conscience. Not even getting into that aspect of things, but kind of like, as an example, you're playing a game of chess, and there are particular paths that you ought to take to achieve the goal of winning at chess. And some moves help you achieve that goal, and some moves actively harm you in that goal. And in the position of the Catholic Church, we are able to see our natural telos. So, for example, I am a living agent, and my natural telos, my natural goal, my natural end, is to continue to thrive and flourish as a human being. But that also means that other human beings have that same telos, that same end, and that same goal. And from there, I am able to determine any act that helps me to achieve my end of thriving, flourishing, and continuing to be as a human being are good. They help me to achieve it. Whereas actions that take away from that are vices. They're immoral. So what about things like, say, for example, charity? Well, charity is now me not only helping myself, but I'm also helping another achieve their end, their goal. And so the moral system is when we're extending that self-end to others as well. And so you're able to look at reality and achieve understanding of what one ought to do and what one not do based on your natural reason alone. And that is still objective because you're basing it on an external thing, and it's not arbitrary, and it can be universally recognized across minds. So regardless of how one approaches the conversation on what is meant by objective, you looking at reality and using your logic and reason, just like how we use science to come to understand objective reality, but we wouldn't call science subjective, or the findings of science subjective. The same is true for morality. If we're looking at reality and using our logic and reason, then why wouldn't that be objective?
Yeah. You're saying in the same way that objectively there are correct moves to win in chess.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are correct
Actions.
moves in morality. Actions.
Yeah, and so it would be the equivalent language system would be like there are correct actions to take to live as a human being. Just like there are correct actions to take in chess, you as a human being have a goal or a natural end to be a human being. Now, people might hear goal, well, what if I want to go out and do X, Y, and Z? No. That is an agent-derived goal. That's not the same thing as your natural goal that would still exist regardless of what you chose to do as your own personal goal as an agent. So, for example, I chose as an agent to do this live. But even if I chose not to do this live, my goal to be a human being and to maintain my status as a living human being still exists. And that's the telos or goal that's being talked about in this particular framework. This was first kind of put forth by Aristotle, built on Thomas Aquinas, and it's what the church has continued to use. But even outside of the religious framework, there has started to be I think Goworth was one of the first to bring it up, but it's almost like a neo-Aristotelian moral system. So it's taking the inspiration of Aristotle, taking what works and what doesn't work, but taking the base framework and continuing on with our new understanding of relations, and just moving on from there. And even the thing to understand that, though, is just like how science, using the correct method, can still come to false conclusions, using the correct method to come to understand what is moral and isn't moral, you can still come to false conclusions within the framework, but that just means that you made a mistake. That doesn't mean that morality in and of itself is subjective. It's you made a mistake. You made a mistake in your determination on what is or isn't moral. So that's where that's where like the disagreements or changes of morality come from. Just like there's changes and disagreements in the scientific realm, but we wouldn't say that what they're doing isn't studying objective reality.
Okay. Interesting. I think that we can, I think subjective morality exists just in virtue that we can have a difference of opinion, though.
Yeah. So, and this is why I don't like the subjective objective language, because like I said, it confuses what I think the real topic is about. Is because you would agree that your moral system, your moral standards that you hold, they're not arbitrary. You didn't just randomly pick your moral standards, right?
No, it's like from experience and trial and error, things like that.
Yep. So there are reasons behind it. So it's not arbitrary. There are reasons that justify that others can arrive at as well. And then so there's that aspect. Now, can people have disagreements? Sure. But the disagreements occur either because there's a piece of evidence that one or both are ignoring or not aware of, or the justification is not following a valid inference rule for one or both of the individuals. But that doesn't mean that what is attempting to be understood isn't objective in and of itself. The way I like to describe it, though, is rather than being evidence against an objective standard or objective system or an objective reality, subjectivity requires there to be an objective thing that we're having the experience of. So if subjective is based on our perceptions, then there has to be something that we are perceiving, even if our perception of that is incorrect. It's basically the noumena versus the phenomena. So there is your subjective experience of that we call the phenomena, to use Kantian language, might be different from my experience of from the phenomena, but it's being produced by the same noumena. And so what our attempt to do is, from our experiences of the phenomena, try to understand what the noumena is. The noumena here being the equivalent for objective morality.
Okay. I guess my question is, would it be incorrect or a misrepresentation to say that subjective morality is grounded in reality? Is that possible?
That would be a misuse of what it means for something to be subjective, because subjective is mind dependent. So it has to be grounded in the mind. You as an atheist, absolutely don't let the divine command theorists fool you. You as an atheist can have objective morality. There's nothing wrong as an atheist to holding objective morality.
Right, but subjective morality must exist in a mind.
So what I would say then is this: the particular conclusions you've drawn might be subjective. However, because they're not arbitrary, your conclusion that is subjective, it's dependent on your mind drawing that conclusion, it could still accurately map onto reality. Because again, to use the science example, let's take the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution is our subjective interpretation of the evidence that we have. However, that subjective interpretation does indeed accurately map onto reality because of the evidence. And so even though it's subjective, it's an accurate representation of reality. So we call it an objective truth. So even if your explanation comes from, subjective aspect, the fact that it's coming from your mind and you're doing it in response to these things, even if that explanation is subjective, if it is an accurate representation of reality, then I don't see why you couldn't call it objective, just like we call evolution an objective truth.
Mm-hmm. Right. I understand that some of my subjective morality can line up with objective facts. But do minds only exist in reality?
I don't see how a mind could, if reality is the collection of all things that exist, I don't see how a mind could exist outside of reality.
That's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is if subjective morality exists in minds and minds are only in reality, then subjective morality is grounded in reality?
Well, okay, so this might help. Did you know that according to science, the laws of physics don't exist? What they're describing exists, but the laws of physics are our attempt at explaining our observation of the interactions of the things that do exist. So if you removed all of the minds, those interactions would still exist and still take place, but the laws of physics wouldn't, because there's no mind to talk about them. So in that sense, could you say that if there was no mind, would morality exist? Sure. If morality is understood as the mind's attempt at explaining what is the right action to do, then yes, if there's no mind, then there's no mind to explain the right action to do or to determine the right action to do. But that doesn't mean that the action or the rightness of the action that the mind is trying to describe doesn't exist absent of the mind, if that makes sense.
Absent of the mind. So morality would exist if no humans existed.
The moral system, if we take morality to just be the system explaining the actions, then correct, it would not exist if there was no mind. But if we take morality to mean the thing that we are trying to describe, then it would still exist outside of the mind. So that's why I'm I don't like talking about morality in the subjective objective, if it's subjective or objective, because what you're trying to convey to your interlocutor, Shadow, correct me if I'm wrong, you're trying to convey, hey, look, even if you're trying to convey to your interlocutor, Shadow, correct me if I'm wrong, you're trying to convey, hey, look, even if all right, I think I'm back. Where did you lose me?
Oh, just 30 seconds in, you were saying, I think what you're trying to convey is...
Okay, so I think what you're trying to convey is that even if your morals are mind-dependent, that they come from your mind, that they're not arbitrary. that there is some justification for them. And it's not the case that you are rolling a pair of dice and saying, all right, what am I going to find moral today? Okay, I decided that celibacy is moral today, and anything that isn't celibacy is immoral. And then I'll roll the dice again in 6 months, and I'll determine what I decide is moral then. And so because your morals aren't arbitrary, even if they are subjective, the real issue of the dialogue and the dialectic is there justification for your morals? Whether it's dependent on your mind or not, I believe is irrelevant to the conversation, because what people are really trying to get at is, no, I have justification for my morals because God told me. Or I have justification for my morals because I can see X, Y, and Z. So from there, that's why I think as we got to move away from the conversation as to whether or not our morals are subjective or objective. What we need to do is talk about whether our morals are arbitrary, or if there are reasons for the moral stances that we take.
Are they arbitrary? Well, I
See,
think that morality can change over time.
Well, but that's the thing, is like, sure, it can change over time, but there's reasons why we hold to particular scientific views, and they've changed over time, but that doesn't make it less objective or less reason given, right? There were reasons to hold the position, contrary to what popular media would tell you. There were valid reasons to hold that the Earth was the center of the solar system because of a lack of an observable parallax shift in the stars. That was one of the biggest things that prevented the acceptance of the Earth moving, because in order for there to be no, they knew the math. In order for the parallax shift to not be observed if the Earth was moving, the distance from the Earth and the stars was so, to them, incomprehensibly huge that they're like, there's no way that's the case. So there was good evidence, and I think it wasn't until like the 1800s that our telescopes were finally powerful enough to observe the parallax shift in the stars. And so there was that change. But there were justifications and reasons for the position. So even if our moral system changes, just like how science changes, but we wouldn't say it's subjective, because there are outside reason givers of the position.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, like,
that's a little interesting.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, we got to get away from the subjective objective, because it muddies the water too much of what people are really trying to get at. Because, like, again, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, Shadow, your whole point is you're trying to tell your interlocutor that your morals are not random, correct?
They're not random.
Yeah.
Let me kind of go through my thinking here. Is we have morality, or you could say abstract thought. Like, we have thoughts.
Yep.
What grounds those thoughts to me is a mind. Like, my mind is giving the meaning to these words, right? Like, we know, you know what I mean when I say rock, but if I said, gobbledygook,
Yeah.
right? If that was the name for the rock, it would still be a rock.
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying is, like, our mind is making the meaning for these things. So it's like, how can I put it? Even if I had bad morality, right? It's my mind that's grounding it.
Yeah. But and that's fine. However, the point that you were trying to make, like, no, I'm looking at reality and I'm making these judgment calls, is you're trying to tell your interlocutor that, and that's what I'm saying, is like, this is the fault of both theists and atheists, I think, in this conversation. So it's not your fault, and it's something that I've recently discovered, like, within this past year. And so I'm trying to spread the message, essentially, as best as I can. is I really do think asking if morals are subjective or objective, especially in the framework of theists and atheists, is the wrong question to ask, because it misses what the purpose or what's really trying to be understood completely. I think the better question that helps reveal the issue is if it's objective or not objective, if there are reasons justifying the position, or if it's arbitrary random. And so the best thing that I would say, Shadow Slays, is the way that you're describing it sounds very familiar to how a lot of naturalist philosophers and natural law theory describes objective morality. You still want to call it subjective, and that's fine. But I think if you start having these conversations and you're talking to your interlocutor and trying to talk about if it being arbitrary or not, I think you'll find the conversation clears up and you'll be able to make a little bit more progress than before.
Okay. You've given me some things to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Oh, looks like he left. All right. But yeah, thank you everyone for the support, for the likes. Before I bring the next guest up, just to let you know, I do have a YouTube, Catholic Thinker, and I've also got a Discord. Both are in the link tree, but if you're having problems with the link tree because it is something that you gotta copy paste, unfortunately, you're gonna have to. But if you shoot me a DM, I'll be happy to get any links, whether it's to my YouTube or my Discord, out to you for you to join. Let's get Jolly.
Hey man, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How old are you?
I'm 26.
All right, and what brings you up today?
So I kind of want to talk about a little bit of the previous conversation a little bit because I sort of listened in a little bit. Are you familiar with like how like in meta ethics how people usually frame subjectivists versus thinking that morals are objective?
Not very well. I kind of have like a vague awareness of it. And what I've discovered is a lot of the people that I speak to, they each talk about it in their own way, and I prefer to meet people where they're at as opposed to like, well, the experts say this. It's like, well, if they're not talking the same way the experts are, I want to know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's fine. But like I was just gonna say like in the literature, just like if you weren't aware, like in the literature, like a subjectivist, like to be a subjectivist is to talk about the truth maker for moral propositions. So, like if you're a subjectivist, then you would think that what makes moral propositions true is just your evaluative states or your attitudes. Whereas, like if you think that morals are objective, then you think that the truth makers are going to be stance independent.
Yeah.
But like it doesn't really matter whether or not it's comes from a mind. Like you could be a course guardian constructivist, for instance, and think that they're mind dependent, but they're stance independent.
I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but that was kind of the point that I was making very early on in that conversation, near the beginning, where I was talking about like, in one sense, math is mind dependent, because whether you're using base 10, base 3, or binary is dependent on the mind. And because of that, you could say that 2 + 2 = 4 is subjective, because if you're using base 10, that's correct. But if you're using base 3, it's false. So, but the truth of it is recognized universally across minds, independent of where it comes from, of where like the truth maker isn't coming from the, as you were saying, the truth maker isn't coming from the mind in and of itself. But because, especially in common discourse, the language is so caught up on mind dependent or mind independent, I try to talk within that framework to help them understand the point that I'm making. But yes, I agree that like a good way to understand it is whether it is, if the truth value of it comes from the mind, or if it's essentially the truth, even if it's dependent on a mind to quote unquote exist, if the truth value is inherent within the statement, or if it's so what Leibniz would call a necessary truth, or a contingent truth where it's dependent on the external world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure about like sort of dividing it from like contingency versus necessity because obviously the modality is going to be need to be clarified there. But like even if there are contingent,
well, no, no.
go
So
ahead.
this isn't talking about like a contingent or necessary being, but rather about proposition. So a contingent
Yeah, no,
proposition would be something like the door is closed. Well,
yeah.
it's true that the door is closed, but if I was to say the door is open instead, it's false, but only because the door is actually closed. But where in the proposition in and of itself is it true or false? Nowhere in the
Well, so
proposition. It's external to the proposition. That's what makes
yeah,
it contingent.
I understand that like so you're not using it in a modal sense, you're just using it to mean like dependence or because like I
Kind
understand
of.
necessity to be a modal operator.
So while Leibniz is like one, from my understanding, like one of the earliest like modal logicians, like but it's not in the way that it currently is, at least the way that he was talking about it for propositions. Um, so yeah, it has nothing to do with it's whether basically whether or not the proposition carries its own truth value, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, or a bachelor is an unmarried man, or a circle has no sides, or no corners.
Oh, well, I kind of understand this to be like when you say necessary truth there, I understand all those examples just to just say that it's necessary in a logical modality. Like there's some like contradiction that's entailed by like x not obtaining or something. But like
Well, the obtaining is within the statement itself. So if I was to say a circle, well, the definition of a circle is that it has no corners, and then I say a circle is a square. Well, now I am talking about two things that, if both were true, can't obtain.
Yeah, but that's just because it's trivially true. It's vacuously true because it's logically necessary.
Well, and that but it's contained within the statement in and of itself. That's what makes it.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's why.
yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's why Leibniz calls that a necessary truth versus a contingent truth, where, like I said, the door being open, it's contingently false due to the fact that the door is actually closed. But
yeah, I understand.
If I was to just present you the statement, the door is open, how would you be able to tell if it's true or false?
Like, if the door is open, would I be able to tell whether or not what proposition is true or false? The fact that it's open? Yeah.
You wouldn't be. You have
Clearly true.
all I've shown you. So let me do another example. The blinds are open.
Okay.
Is that true or false?
Oh, you mean just like not conditional on them being open? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So
I thought you were saying like if it's the case that the blinds are open, then the blinds are open. That's trivially true. But like if it's to affirm the antecedent is going to require some like synthetic facts about the world. Yeah.
Well, I haven't even put forth an if then statement. It was just the blinds are open. Is that proposition true or false? We don't know just based on the proposition alone, right?
Yeah.
But if I was to say this bachelor is married, you would be able to tell that that's false based on the proposition alone.
Yeah, because it's an analytic truth. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was talking about, like the so even if because the definition of bachelor comes from the mind, right? Like we invented that definition, right? So, but the mind isn't giving it its truth. It's, as you said, analytically true, so it's self-contained truth, even if it's mind dependent. Whereas the blinds are open, it gets its truth value external from the mind. So it's still not a mind-dependent truth because it's getting its truth value independent of a mind.
Yeah.
But I like chocolate. Well, I, the mind, am what's giving the truth value to that statement.
Yeah, well, how does this relate to subjectivism versus objectivism?
Oh, so I was just saying that the reason why it gets so muddled is because a lot of people take subjective to mean mind dependent. So,
Right, yeah.
So I was agreeing with you saying that technically speaking, even though 2 plus 2 equals 4, or a bachelor is unmarried, or a bachelor is unmarried, those are all mind dependent statements because we invent definitions on the mind.
Mhm.
But the truth value isn't coming from the mind. So I was using that to indicate how even something being dependent on a mind doesn't get its truth value from the mind. So I was agreeing with you and using that as an
Right.
example of the point you were making.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I guess like we got that. Do you take it that ideological parsimony is credence raising at all?
I'm not familiar with, like, are you talking about, like, because a lot of my expertise is in classical philosophy, and I haven't heard of the term. Like, I know, parsimonious harmony has been a recent argument that's come up about, like, dualism and the fact that we have pleasant experience of good things and bad experiences of harmful things, and using that as an argument for God. But I'm not familiar with what you're describing.
Oh, that's interesting. I never heard that one before. I mean, I know of if you're talking in a loose way about psychophysical harmony, is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Have you heard like obviously like in those cases like it definitely would require dualism to be true or like something like that,
Yeah.
because if there's an identity relation between like physical states and phenomenal states, that's not going to be very convincing to like the physicalists.
Yep.
But then of course like if and then also like, are you familiar with Detroyer?
So, couple of things, like, and this might like ruin my credence a little bit, but I am very new to the TikTok debate space, and I am also, like, my knowledge of philosophy starts with Plato and ends with Nietzsche, essentially.
That's okay.
Anything past Nietzsche, I am not as well familiar, because as I was getting to Nietzsche, I kind of realized a lot of these people are starting to repeat a lot of the same points, just reframing it in different ways. So as far as like thinkers past Nietzsche, I am not familiar. In fact, I didn't even know who Ed Feser was until I started joining this conversation, and I love Thomas Aquinas, and so a lot of people are shocked I don't know who he is, or didn't know who he was until I started talking to people in the more modern dialectic.
Yeah. Okay, then I guess we could talk about those, because a lot of the things I like about the Bayesian arguments are going to like involve a lot of analytic philosophy. But like, yeah, I mean, so like as far as like act impotency is concerned, what do you think about like that as compatible with like fourth dimensional internalism? And just to say that, like,
that's something that I'm planning on looking more in depth. I hope and I think possibly it could be saved, but I'm okay with act and potency being relative descriptors, kind of like yesterday and today and tomorrow being relative descriptors for us going through time, even though technically yesterday is as actualized as today.
Right. No, that's fair. Like, you could think that, like, you know, it is the case that. Wait, are you familiar with the block universe?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Like, yeah. Like, you could say that like different like sort of parts in this sort of like block universe, there are areas where, you know, objects sort of enter this like state of potency, which is sort of like an intermittent state, between like, you know, non-actualization and actualization,
Yeah, where
where like they could have some, yeah, go on.
yeah, basically where we see acorn at moment A and it's actualized at moment A, and then it's growing through quote unquote potentiality through time, and we observe it as a change of potentiality into actuality. But in reality, the tree, what needed to be actualized, was just as actualized as the acorn. I'm okay with it as being like a descriptor of appearances, and a kind of abstraction from experience. Uh,
Yeah, like an epistemic sort of
yeah,
tool,
yeah,
right? Like, but then of course, then you would be saying that active potency realism is false, right? You would just be saying that like it's, yeah.
yeah, and like I said, I haven't done the research to see if that actually is the case. But at this point in time, I'm not overly concerned with it because a lot of the ways that I go about trying to argue for God is not about act potency, but about dependency, and whether and about things being dependent and independent. That's the approach that I tend to go for this type of conversation.
Are you familiar with, you're not familiar with Oppie, are you?
I've heard the name. I've read a couple of blurbs that people have forwarded over to me, but like I haven't studied him in depth.
Yeah, so like it kind of depends on what you mean by dependency and like what you take that to be, but so like Oppie's view is just simply that um, there exists a singularity at t0 at an initial state, and that's just going to be numerically identical with the actual worlds or the natural worlds, and sort of the idea is that like metaphysical modalities sort of laid out as all the worlds that sort of branch off from the sort of initial state, such that like it would be independence depending on like how you sort of take independence to be.
Yeah.
So I guess like what would you go ahead?
So the approach that I try to go is, and I've actually got it pinned on my profile. But it's the route that I try to go is first establishing that there needs to be an independent thing. And now that we have established, there are some people that deny that independent things exist, which is why I have that first part. But once I've established an independent thing, what I've noticed is theists will a lot of times brute posit God as the independent thing, and atheists will brute posit the universe as the independent thing. But I don't think either approach is justified. We know that there needs to be an independent, and I think what the next step ought to be is identify what enables independency. Like, what is the nature of a thing that would enable it to be independent? And once we've established that, then we're able to go and establish whether the universe fits that criteria or if something other than the universe fits that criteria. And that's what I try to do in the argument is do that. Basically, the way that I understand it is like, for example, Albert Einstein did math, and based on his math of relativity, he came to the conclusions that if you went in one of either directions, you either got to white holes or you got to dark, and you got to on one direction, and you got to dark holes on the other direction. Do you have a pair of headphones? Because I'm hearing a bit of an echo.
Oh, and no, I don't. I could try going somewhere else.
Okay.
Is this better?
Let me see. Testing. No, because it's coming from me as I talk. What I'm
Oh
gonna
no,
do
that's
is,
not good.
as I'm talking, I'll mute you up, and then
Yeah.
but so Albert Einstein, when he was working on his relativity, he discovered that depending on what you did with the numbers, you got on one end you got black holes, and on the other end you got white holes. And so we now have established what a black hole is and what a white hole is before we even got to observe that they actually existed. And then we started observing the cosmos, and we noticed stars behaving in a particular way that was indicative of what we would expect of if black holes existed. Random movements, random aggressive orbits, and all before we ever got the direct physical photo of the black hole. We knew they existed because all of the criteria that would be indicative of a black hole existing, we had observed. We haven't observed white holes, and we haven't observed anything that would be indicative of white holes existing, such to the point that most physicists are now convinced that white holes don't exist. And so I'm trying to do a very similar approach where I'm first laying out, all right, so we have something that's necessary based on the fact that we know that it cannot fail to exist. It absolutely has to exist. What are the entailments of that we can determine? What would we expect of that? And then we can look to see if that fits the universe or if that fits something else.
So, couple things. So, when you bring up necessity, I understand that to be a modal operator. Something that's
I did misspeak.
Yeah, something that's distinct. Yeah.
I did misspeak there, I will admit, because by necessity, I'm referring to how the classicals used it, where they were referring to more to independent existence just because of habit. But just replace necessity with independent, looking at what enables a thing to be independent.
Yeah, but like something else you said there. I think you were talking about like how it has to be there, but I don't really understand an independent thing as a way that's something that has to be there. I only understand like something that's necessary in a modal way has to be there.
So that's part of that first argument. Half of the argument essentially is establishing that an independent thing exists and that it cannot fail to exist, that it must exist. And then from there, continuing on to explore what the nature of that independent thing is.
So there's a distinction from saying necessarily there has to be an independent thing versus there has to be a necessary independent thing. So like we could say that like necessarily there must be something that is independent in every world, but that doesn't mean that that thing is the same thing that is independent across every world.
So and that's what I'm trying to establish. And the argument is, all right, so we've established what, that there needs to be an independent thing in every world, and that it could not have failed to exist. All right, what is shared or what is required for this thing to be independent? And then once that's been established, then we're able to basically, let me put it to you like this. You and I are both human, and there are attributes regarding about what makes a thing be human that if they weren't present in either of us, you and I would not be human. That's what I'm trying to do for the independent thing. Now that we've established that there necessarily has to be an independent thing, what is required in order for that thing to be independent, that if it wasn't there, it wouldn't be independent?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that would definitely be a task to do. I mean, I think that I'm not really too worried about, because a lot of people have like worries about infinite causal regresses, like an infinite chain of dependent things, whether that be in a per se causal sequence or per accidens causal sequence. And I don't really share the same worries about it, but I am interested to see where you go with this. So like, let's just grant that there has to be at least one independent thing in every world. Like, what's the next step?
So that's where that's like I said, if I was to go through it right now, it's a lot of steps. I do have it on my TikTok. It's the pinned video where I go through every single step. I also do have a video on my YouTube that goes into the infinite regress that Thomas Aquinas is talking about, because it's different from, like, he would have been fine with an infinite causal series, but his question is then, is that infinite causal series self-explanatory? If it is, great, that's the independent thing. If it's not, now we got to look for an independent thing.
I'm skeptical about saying something is self-explanatory. Like I understand something like being in an analytic truth. But like presumably when we're talking about like an infinite causal regress, we're talking about synthetic facts. And like there is like an analytic synthetic distinction that I think actually does obtain. So like unless it's the case that we would say that something is self-explanatory to mean something is logically necessary, that means that there's some contradiction that obtains from X not existing. And I just think that if by self-explanatory you just mean logically necessary or an analytic fact, like it's the same, it's like in the same vein. I think an argument like that, or to say that something is like self-explanatory, you know, that isn't something like the theorems of logic or like the laws of mathematics. Like I think that's going to be way too ambitious. But
Well, so the thing is that like, so as Thomas Aquinas puts it, God is self-evident to him, but not to us. However, he does agree that also, though, that to deny God, once you understand the nature of him, to deny God does lead to an analytical contradiction. I really like his argument on Dientia, on being an essence, where he, like, I believe that is his actual attempt at proving God's existence to non-believers, whereas the five ways was just his teaching tool to fellow believers. Now, it does use a lot of Aristotelian language and everything else, and so what I'm attempting to do in my argument is basically remove the Aristotelian language to arrive at the same conclusion. And even if God's existence isn't self-evident in the sense that, like, the law of identity, A equals A, is self-evident, if someone didn't know what bachelor meant and I said, this bachelor is married, they wouldn't know that it's a contradiction, right? But once they understand the nature of what it means to be a bachelor, they then can see that to say a bachelor is married now leads to a contradiction. And so what I'm trying to do is showing the need for a particular kind of being, establishing what follows from the nature of this kind of being having this nature, which then leads to the conclusion that it does lead to a contradiction to say this does not obtain.
have you are you familiar with like because this is sounding more and more like an ontological argument?
It's
Are
not.
you?
I promise you, it's not. I know it does sound like, and even I was thinking, it's like, man, this is sounding like I'm arguing for an ontological argument. But both me and Aquinas do not like ontological arguments.
Yeah, so I mean it sounds interesting. Like if it's the case that you like would it just be something like God like has an identity relate or is defined by having an essence or something, and
So
if it's the case that essence doesn't exist, then
effectively, what I'm trying to do is show that existence has its own essence or its own nature that is identical to it, the fact that it exists. And because that's different than the universe, and because we understand God to be that which grounds everything else, and everything else gets its existence from the thing whose identity is existence, I am labeling that as God, which is not the same as defining God as existence itself, but more of recognizing that existence itself must exist. And so instead of just saying existence itself over and over in dialectic, I am replacing that with the term God.
yeah, but I mean like I think treating exist because it seems like you're almost treating existence like a substance. Like just to say that it has an essence or it has like a nature.
Yeah.
And like I wouldn't accept a view like that.
I mean, and that's why I said, like, it's using Aristotelian, like, the way that Thomas Aquinas describes it is using Aristotelian language of, like, substance and things like that. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to express and convey the same idea without that quote unquote metaphysical baggage. My ultimate goal is, and I know it's way too ambitious and I probably am never going to achieve it, but I can't let this idea go. I had this realization, and I think you'll appreciate it with you talking about like the model, possible worlds, and model logic. Um, you're familiar that there are people who are necessitarians. There's also people who are determinists. There's also people who hold to compatibilism. There's also people who hold to the existence of contingencies. There's all of these different accounts of trying to explain the phenomenal experience that we observe, correct?
Yeah.
And all of them are at least logically consistent and metaphysically possible, right?
I don't know about that. It depends on your view of metaphysical modality.
But
Like,
they're at least consistent. Like, they're not inherently contradictory. They might be externally contradictory, like they contradict the actual reality, but they're at least inherent. If we accept the axioms, they follow.
yeah, I mean, I think some depends. I think some permutations of taking some of those views are incompatible, but like,
Oh yeah, I'm not.
there are
Yeah.
ways to. There are ways to. But I know what you mean. You like there are ways to like take any one of these views and not have them entail a contradiction. At least most of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and by that I mean, like, if determinism is true, yes, obviously compatibilism is false. I'm not saying that all of them are the case, but determinism is trying to explain how the world works based on its observations, and compatibilism is trying to do the same thing based on the same evidence and on the same features. So, and this is me playing a little bit of a word game, but once it hit my head, is I just couldn't let it go. What if that's the equivalent of a possible world, where determinism is a possible world because it is a possible, valid explanation of how the world actually is, and compatibilism is a different possible explanation for how the world actually is. So what if those are the possible worlds? And if a necessary being, or a necessary truth, like 2 + 2 = 4, is necessarily true in both determinism and compatibilism, could and those are true independent of the worldview, so to speak, could an argument be formatted that works to show the existence of God independent of one's metaphysical worldview? A necessary argument, so to speak. And once I got that idea in mind, I can't let it go, and so I'm trying to make an argument that works for God regardless of one's metaphysical worldview.
I mean, it just sounds like you're like all these things that you're mentioning have to do with logical modality, but then that would just mean that you'd be saying something like God is logically necessary, but that's way too ambitious. Like that would mean that you have to like come up with a contradiction that's entailed by like a world obtaining and God not obtaining. But so good luck. I mean, you could try.
But here's the thing: is just like we've done half of the work, because we can show that if there is only contingencies, that it fails to obtain, or it entails a logical contradiction if there isn't something brute at the very least.
Wait, you mean by contingency, you just mean dependent, right?
Well, in the modal sense, but as well, but like at this point, like in modal
Modal sense?
in the modal logical sense, like if everything is contingent and requires an external explanation, then there requires something necessary. Or everything is contingent, but being contingent doesn't necessitate external explanation, and there's something that's brutally contingent. So that's why I said, if everything is contingent, it still requires something brute. And necessity by definition would be something that's brute, as in like there is no explanation for it. But the difference is that a brute contingency could fail to obtain, whereas a necessary could never fail to obtain. But that's what I was saying, is like we can logically show that it entails a contradiction, that there needs to be a brute contingency, even if, like you were saying, like you accept like an infinite regress of contingencies, the entire system in and of itself would be that brute contingency. But that's what I was getting at, is like that's the goal. I do believe that it can be done. I think Thomas Aquinas got very close to it, and I think for his time frame he did succeed. But now that these other worldviews and these other systems have sprouted, I want to try to abstract it, so to speak, even more and make it even more independent of the particular language system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's fine. You can try. I mean, are you familiar with? I mean, until then, though, I mean, I think that the best argument for God ever conceived was the fine tuning argument.
Ooh,
Um,
we were having such fun. Why'd you have to say that?
yeah, ask me about it. You can. I can LARP the fine tuning argument if you want.
No, like the thing is like I heard from, I don't know if you know of Dr. Blitz, but I spoke with him, and apparently he helped write an academic paper with someone he went to university with and studied under, and the conclusion that they came to is that the universal constants might not exist. The very thing that, fine tuning is dependent on. And then even then, I think at best the fine tuning, all it does is it just posits God as a possible explanation for the way the universe is, but it doesn't show that God actually exists. It just shows that one isn't irrational for holding to a God existing. It just posits an argument that the statistical likelihood of God existing is not zero, if that makes sense.
It's not just that. The argument tries to show that the probability of God existing conditional on fine tuning is greater than the not God view. So the idea is that it's sort of designed to show that, like, the evidence for God is greater. So if you have like,
but that's what I'm saying, is just like, so let's say that the under the fine tuning, the proposition that God exists is better expected under the fine tuning, and that raises the probability of God existing to, let's say, 60, 70, 80%, even 90%. And the not God proposition to 10%. I'm looking for something that does it at 100%.
Yeah, but like that's not really necessary. Like for instance, I believe that I have a car.
Mm-hmm.
Am I 100% certain that I have that my car is still there in the parking lot? No. Like am I 99 or like 90% sure that I have hands right now? Yeah, but I mean, there's like a 0.001% chance that like my hands have gone missing, but like we don't really like engage with the world or believe like other things, the vast majority of things, because we have 100% credence level. And like I would say, like, I'm a fallibilist, so I think that like I don't really have anything that I have 100% credence for, because there's always a possibility that my reasoning faculties have failed me, right? Like, so I mean, like I don't think that that's really like something that people need to do. All they need to show is that the likelihood of God existing is greater than not God, and boom.
So,
and it's really
So there's a difference. Like, so what are the odds of the universe being having a finite past versus an infinite past?
Oh, you're just asking me? I have no idea. I'm like 50-50.
So 50-50, right? Let's say it was 51-49 of one or the other. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the 51% was for the infinite past. Does that now mean that is more rational, or that everyone should now accept infinite past, and that everyone who holds to a finite past is unjustified?
So this is a very, very, very interesting point and a really good point. So are you familiar with underdetermination?
I am not.
So the idea is that like if it's the case that something is more likely or like slightly more expected under a hypothesis, then there's like a certain like level or a certain like sort of threshold level something needs to pass before you're actually warranted in believing it. And like I think that there's like many different views on it. What I would say in that case is that if it is the case that it is 50-50 in general, like let's say it's not 51-49 and it's actually just 50-50, then I would say the most rational thing to believe for everybody is not take a view on it.
Yeah.
Right? Not take a view on either side. But then of course, like you would say that like in this case, like you would have to say that an infinite past is more likely. But you could in this case, like say in the 51% that the evidence is underdetermined. But like there becomes a level like when we get to like like 75%, where we start saying things like, okay, now it might be like reasonable to say that you believe in something.
But that's the point. There's a difference between being justified to hold the belief or it being reasonable to hold the belief. When I first started going live, I first had my paradigm as belief in God is reasonable. Because even if it's, let's say, 20% that God exists, like the evidence is 20% for God existing, there can still be justified reasons given to make the position reasonable to hold. Just because something is unlikely doesn't mean it's unreasonable. And just because something is very likely doesn't make it true. Is it good epistemic practice to take the more likely one over the unlikely one? Sure. Absolutely. I'm not denying that. But that's why I was saying all the fine-tuning argument does, at best, is show that it's reasonable or justifiable to hold the position that God exists. And the point that I was trying to get at was something that you did bring up, is there does come a level where the statistical likelihood of the explanation being, like, for example, that we are all in a simulation, due to the evidence and the energy requirement and all of these other things that are mathematically and physically impossible, the statistical likelihood of us all being in a simulation is so low it might as well be zero. Is there ever a point where we can ever say with absolute certainty that for something that isn't a contradiction that it cannot be the case? Like, can it be possible that we're all brains in the vat? Sure, but the statistical likelihood of that is so low it might as well be zero. But at what point? But even then, for something that's so low that it might as well be zero, can we truly say that one is not justified for holding that position if they do hold that position? So I'm trying to find something that is analytically true to the point where negating or denying the conclusion does lead to a contradiction. And I know that's hard, but I do believe it's possible. That's why I don't like the fine-tuning argument, because it doesn't do that. It raises probability, like you said, but it doesn't do what I want to do.
Yeah, I understand that you might do. I know what you want to do. I think that project is very ambitious. You can try, but regardless, like the reason why I would say it's the best is because of the fact that it's not very ambitious. Yeah. And also like, are you familiar with like the fantastic evidence for God?
Yep.
By Miles Donahue? Right. So like the idea is in that case, yeah, I mean the probability isn't like zero that that the not God world is true given the fantastic evidence for God.
Yep.
But like it's like I mean we might not be able to say like, oh, it's it's 50, it's like 60 or it's like 75. But the idea of the fine tuning argument is just to say like, well, like look at the mathematical like improbability of it, of all these like constants, or like the worlds being life permitting on the not God worldview versus the theistic worldview. And then you basically just say like in virtue of that, and also the fact that there's good explanatory power for why we would find like more worlds where universes that are life permitting on the theistic, like on bare theism. I mean, like that I think that's like, if that's successful, that's very 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 good evidence for God. And like you run that along with all the Bayesian arguments, and you kind of just do the same thing for all of them. At least like the three main ones: the homological harmony, psychophysical harmony, and fine tuning. And I think you can make a very good case for the existence of God. And I think that like but do I think it's successful? No, because of the Troyer. But
and that's my like that's kind of my point, and that's why I don't like it. Do I begrudge anyone for running it? No. Like, if you want to run it, go for it, as long as you understand that it doesn't demonstrate or disprove all other hypotheses and leave only the God hypothesis. As long as you understand that as you run it, go for it. You're using it correctly. If you're using it just to show the atheist that the God hypothesis is not only not zero, but also potentially greater than any other explanation, then you're using it correctly. I want to do something more than that. And the math behind it is so deep and heavy that it's very easy to mess up for a layperson, and I'm trying to find something that's easily accessible to almost anyone.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, something that you said earlier on, and I think this is all hinging on, is like you could be reasonable, and like let's just say there's a 20% chance God exists, 80% chance God doesn't exist.
Yep.
Like the person is reasonable, a person can be reasonable, hold like God exists. So I think that that's true to a certain extent. So I think that if this person has only been given the arguments to prove like for the 20%, so like the let's just say that like the 20% is from evidence and a wide variety of arguments. Like let's say I'm a guy, I was born yesterday, I know the basics of logic, right?
Yep.
I know the basics of epistemology, and I hear all these arguments for God. Like I would say that like, yeah, I mean, maybe it would be reasonable to conclude that God exists then, right? Like, but I would say that now, let's say that I'm now presented with all of the arguments for atheism, and it actually turns out that I know, or I'm justified in believing, that 80% likely God doesn't exist, 20% God does exist. I would say that you would be irrational to say that that you believe God exists then, because you don't have justification there. But yeah, you can.
Well, so that's going to depend on how you're doing the justification, because like you said, well, where is the 80% coming from? How is that justified? But give me just a moment, because I'm trying to see if I can find something. Number of philosophers.
No, I'm just imagine. I'm not saying like it is the case. I'm just saying like conditional on it being the case. Like let's imagine it was, just for the sake of argument.
So professional surveys show that roughly 59% of philosophers or philosophy faculty, so I don't want to say philosopher, but philosophers show that roughly 59% of philosophers or philosophy faculty, so I don't want to say philosopher, but philosophers have shown that roughly 59% of philosophy faculty accept compatibilism. And so, while I know that surveys aren't a good way to show the statistical likelihood of a like a metaphysical worldview like determinism or compatibilism, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's just use this as a rough estimate and say that compatibilism is 59% likely to be true, 60% likely to be true. Does that mean that, and let's say all the other philosophers are hard determinists? Obviously, that's not the case, as there's some that are different worldviews, but just for the sake of the example, 40% are hard determinists. are those hard determinists unjustified because they're very familiar with the arguments for compatibilism? Does that mean, though, that they are unjustified for being a hard determinist? I don't think they are, because of something Socrates once pointed out. If the entire world is insane except for one man, they would claim the one man is insane. So
the question is,
go ahead.
No, yeah, I know, I know what you're saying, but like, so there is a distinction between, like, in those cases, the reason why we wouldn't say that is because the amount of people in this case isn't necessarily indicative of the probability of a view being true, right? So, like, like, that's sort of where there's epistemic uncertainty, right? Like, at least for you and me, like, who know a bit about, compatible, hard determinism versus compatibilism. Like, there are many reasons why some people take views in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people just kind of just take it because it's like, oh, they think it's like the best view, or they have like other commitments that it's more compatible with.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean, that's not what's in question, is whether or not that's a reflection of the actual probability of a view being true, which is something that's in question. But we're imagining, like, let's say that all hard determinists and all compatibilists, like, come together, and then they all drum up this argument, and all of them together come and realize that the probability of compatibilism is 80%, probability of hard determinism is 20%.
Yep.
And that's actually true. So, like, it is actually true that that's the case. I would say that all of the hard determinists would be irrational then to believe in hard determinism.
So what makes something be rational?
That's a really great question. I take it that something is rational if it's the case that a belief is formed off of epistemic virtues. So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
Okay. So is it possible to be rational and wrong?
Yeah, it's possible to be rational and wrong, but that's just because you can have incorrect information coming in, but still align yourself with epistemic virtues.
And is it possible to... So let's say that they have correct information, and they are doing their... Or let's say they have incorrect information, and they are using their resources correctly, but they still come to a false conclusion because of the incorrect information. Are they being rational?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let us say that there is some bias that is uncontrollable. Give me just a moment. There is some bias that is outside of their control. Like, they're not even aware of this cognitive bias that they hold. And they have all of the correct information, and they're using valid inference rules, but due to the bias, they interpret the evidence a little bit differently to where they come to a false conclusion. Are they being rational?
So I think it kind of depends whether or not we're like subsuming biases under like epistemic virtues, which I probably would. So, like, I would say that, like, doing things without bias is going to be an epistemic virtue. So to say that
you're never going to eliminate all of your biases, and I even said that they were unaware that this bias exists.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I would say that if you're trying to, you're talking about kind of like an undercutting defeater, right? So yeah, I mean, like, if we don't subsume a bias into like epistemic virtues, then yeah, you could still be rational. It's just the case that there's an undercutting defeater that you're not aware of.
Yeah. So, and could that bias be so ingrained, again, where you're not aware of it? Like, this is the key distinction I'm trying to make here. Like, if you're aware of a bias and you hold on to it because you're afraid of what it leads to, then yeah, that's not being rational. That's not being intellectually honest, and that's not having epistemic virtue.
Yeah.
But if
If you're not aware of
If
it, yeah.
you're not aware of it and it's so ingrained and you can't overcome it, even if people try to point out to you there's something that is blocking you epistemically from accepting it. Because, like, for example, I reject nominalism. I don't understand why people accept it. I reject it. And I try to help people understand the moderate realism position that I hold, where the universals don't exist as this substance, but they are abstractions. So my position is a lot closer to nominalism than they think, yet they still don't accept my position. There is something epistemically blocking them from their bias that they can't overcome. Yet, I wouldn't say that they're being irrational. Because they are trying to make sure they're overcoming biases, but there's just something there that is blocking them from obtaining it. So, with all of that being said, that's why I don't like the fine-tuning argument, because the person can still be epistemically justified and still be rational, even if God is more likely, and reject the God hypothesis.
No, like, so the thing is that I was saying conditional on the fact that they know that there's a probability. In the case that they have a bias, well, then you're just saying like, well, they wouldn't know that they wouldn't know the actual probability. In which case, like, yeah, I mean, if you don't know that 20% God, 80% not God, then yeah, of course, then you would be rational not holding to that. But
that's
that
what I'm
wasn't
saying.
in my original.
Well, but that's
My
what I'm
original.
saying. I can know that people tell me that it's 80% not God, for example. And yet I can be convinced that the reason why they think that is due to a fault in their percent. Like, the reason why they hold to 80% not God is because they hold to naturalism. But I disagree with naturalism. And I have good reasons to disagree with naturalism. That's why I hold to the 20%. I guess the equivalent would be like, you come across a deck that's been shuffled, and then it's dealt face up to you, and it comes up as a royal flush. Is it statistically more likely that the person who shuffled the cards was a card shark and was able to do so and arrange the cards intentionally, even if he was making it appear as random? Yes. But a person wouldn't be unjustified in also holding that it was just random luck that we saw one in a quadrillion chance occur. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is just because something is statistically more likely doesn't mean that awareness of the statistical outcome demands acceptance of it. Can one be justified in accepting it just based on the statistical outcome alone? Sure. And is one going to be harder pressed to accept the lesser likelihood option? Sure. But they're not being dishonest by knowingly accepting the lower outcome.
So there's, in the case of the shuffled deck of cards, like, there is something that you have to factor in, of course, which is probability of outcomes. Like, if it's the case that, like, however many deck of cards have been shuffled in front of people, like, what's the likelihood that at least one of them is going to be? I mean, like, we get into like some conflation, like some
That's
convolution there, but
that's why I
but
said
like
the 1 in a quadrillion. I forget what the exact number is, but yes, like I was trying to account for that. But I was saying
Okay.
this is like, the person who says it was that I just witnessed the 1 in quadrillion chance would not be unjustified in doing so, while the one who holds no, this was done with intention because I think this guy is a card shark and is able to do that, and I know that there are people with that ability, he would be justified as well. So both of these individuals are justified, even though the one who said, no, this was the 1 in quadrillion chance and I just witnessed something incredible, that is not an unjustified position to take.
Well, let's just say he shuffles it like 100 times. and then every single time he comes up with a royal flush, right? Like, then yeah, I mean, I would say that it's unjustified to hold that he's not a card,
Well,
that he's like not a
yeah.
card shark in that case. But
like I said, at that point, in time, we now have evidence that basically brings the other position to near zero. And at that point, the epistemic burden to be justified to hold that position is a lot higher. But I'm not sure the fine-tuning succeeds at showing the likelihood of God is greater than the likelihood of not God to such to the same scale, essentially, is what I'm saying. It's at best, it does it where the person is still justified in saying, no, I just witnessed the 1 in quadrillion chance.
So I would say that in this case, because something that I would say is, sorry, we were talking about something earlier. Then I was gonna say something, but then like we started talking about this. I would say that like I would say that if it is the case that in any circumstance something is more likely than something else, then yeah, I mean I would say that like it's I remember what I was gonna say. It is more rational to believe it, but regardless, like this whole thing about a bias, it's going to factor into like no matter who we're talking to, right? Like even if you convince some, even if you successfully run a modal ontological argument, and like you've done it, right? You've proved MOA, and God like necessarily exists. Like the person with the bias is still going to like factor in. But I think that when we're looking at like well, what arguments should we run? We're not interested in like running an argument against somebody who has such like an incredible bias that they wouldn't accept the most rational position. The whole point of like what makes a good argument is that if somebody's rational, then they would hold to like some like a thing, and not only just rational, but they don't have any biases like that they're unaware of that would like yeah, go ahead.
Because if I remember correctly, you are not a believer, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you think that the best argument is the fine-tuning argument, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you think the fine-tuning argument succeeds in showing that the existence of God is more likely than the non-existence of God?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that when we're comparing bare theism versus bare naturalism, like okay, well, I'll just run the actual response itself. So we're going to put 2 constraints on the prior. So the first is that theism or bare theism is not and more or less antecedently less likely, or sorry, more likely than bare naturalism or bare non-design, I should say. And I'm by bare theism, I just mean bare design hypothesis. And then the second like constraint is just going to be like fine-tuning conditional on bare design is not more or less likely than fine-tuning conditional on bare non-design. And sort of the motivation for this is that think of all like the possible designers out there, like in the bare theist hypothesis. Like the reason why fine-tuning is like you might think is successful is because it has to introduce other different properties of God to explain why it would be the case that having life permitting conditions is more likely. But nonetheless, we can conceive of all like the different like possible designers. And in the case of like naturalism as well, like we can like so like we could conceive of like all the like the things that that would make life permitting conditions like expected as well. And at least it doesn't seem to be the case that that like a wider variety of designers like we would expect to see actually having the properties necessary to explain why like life permitting conditions obtain. And even if we do grant something like this, the idea is that I think that when you introduce more properties of something to explain X, you're going to introduce additional like ontological commitments, which is going to make something antecedently less likely, which is going to mean the priors are going to sort of be offset by that fact. So yeah, I don't really take it that the fine tuning argument is really successful for that reason.
Okay. So if it cannot raise the probability of a God existing based on, observable data to where it is now a greater than naturalism, by the way, like, and the reason why that isn't a problem for me is because I believe that if God did create the world, he created a natural world, and he created a world that naturally functions according to its own natural system. So it's not that it's naturalism versus supernaturalism in my view. It's more of naturalism plus, if that makes sense. Like, I believe that naturalism and everything that naturalism entails, except for the denial of the supernatural. But I don't think the supernatural contradicts the natural. I think they work hand in hand together. Similar to like how someone who might say, "Oh, I want to use only a priori knowledge," I think they would have an incomplete system of knowledge. You need a priori and a posteriori knowledge. So it's not a contradiction of one or the other. The other thing, and this is why I also don't like the fine tuning argument, because it's dealing with numbers and statistics and odds and things like that. This is quoted by Ronald Coase. If you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. So if you wanted the constants to be one thing, if you ran the numbers one way, you can make it say whatever you want. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to determine what actually is the case. And I
mean, I'm not sure about the second bit, but what was the first thing you said again?
That
Oh yeah, you believe in naturalism plus. The
Yeah.
fine tuning argument can just be run with bare design or bare non-design. You don't need like naturalism versus theism.
Well, but that's what I'm saying is, for a naturalist, they deny anything outside of the natural realm. And so a designer that's within the natural realm isn't the same thing as a god. So
No, yeah, that's fine. I just like that's why I'm saying like if you're running the fine tuning argument and like you consider yourself a naturalist plus because God exists in the natural world as a part of the natural world. Like it doesn't really matter. You could just run like a
I'm
bare
saying
design or bare non-design.
I think God is outside the natural realm, but he doesn't contradict the natural realm. And so the naturalist is able to say, well, no, I can account for everything about the reason why things are the way that we are and the way that we observe them to be based on naturalistic explanations. And I don't have a defeater for that because I agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure there's no contradiction. Like you could account for all of it. The question is whether or not the question is whether or not like all of these things sort of coming together would be like more expected under a designer versus not.
Well, and this is what I said to someone else who like, and I don't know what it is with atheists liking to LARP the fine tuning argument, but
we do love to do that.
Yeah, I was talking this with another atheist. You might know him, Jaden. Goes by Sin now. But he likes running the fine tuning argument as well. And I told him, here's the thing. According to the way that I and Thomas Aquinas view the way that God creates, God didn't have to necessarily create, and he didn't have to necessarily create the world in this particular realm. So fine-tuning just doesn't work because you're almost running it backwards from the way it needs to be. The reason why we as Christians say that God values life and he values a particular kind of life is not because we started from, all right, what were the constants and let's work backwards, so therefore God must have desired this. Rather, it's, okay, so we've established that God exists, even before outside of fine-tuning. We've established that God exists. And he's an agent. We've established that he's an agent. So he has a will and a goal he wants to accomplish. So creation must be a part of him accomplishing that goal, and us existing must also be a part of accomplishing that goal. The way that Thomas Aquinas describes it is fittingness. So, presuming, for the sake of this conversation, God exists, there was a fall of humanity where we're now in a state of original sin and we require salvation, and then God sent his son down to die on a cross for our salvation. What Thomas Aquinas says is God did not have to do that. Nothing necessitated God to do any of those things. In fact, even all the way up to before the cross happened, God could have just said, you know what, I forgive y'all, let's start from a clean slate, and that would have been enough. And that would have happened. But no, he decided to do it through a cross. So now the question is, well, why? Well, if God is perfect, God is all-knowing, God is all good, and wants to accomplish the greatest possible end, then the cross must be the only way to achieve that. Why is it the only way? We don't know. Why is that the end that God picked? We don't know. That's why Thomas Aquinas calls it fitting. So what the Thomistic could say is, it is fitting that these constants are this particular way to produce this particular outcome. But you can't work backwards of, the constants are this particular way, therefore God, from the way that the Thomistic understands God and his act of creation.
Sorry, at the beginning, did you say that like God, like the natural, like God, you would say that God still would have fixed the constants, right?
Yeah, he still would have fixed the constants, but he could have fixed them any way he wanted. He wasn't necessarily bound by a particular set, and
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but the thing is though is that like you could easily just sidestep this and just change it from, instead of talking about the constants, you just talk about like life permitting worlds. Because if it's the case that
well,
that God
that's
can,
what I was getting at, is if what God desires is life, well, bacteria is life, plants are life. Yet, as a Christian, I don't say that God specially desired that kind of life. He specially desired physical creature with a rational soul. He desired our kind of life.
yeah, but the point is that like for that to even be the case, like would be like um the idea is the probability of that happening on no design is so unbelievably low, but like on design, like it's so unbelievably high. Even if it's the case that he like doesn't desire bacteria, you could think that it's just a byproduct.
So, but the critique then is, why does God desire this? And that's the defeater that people will run who try to, in response to this. And
I got you, by the way.
And the response of the Thomist is, we don't know. We have to reason backwards. We can't use our existence. We can't use the constants to argue towards God, but we can use our existence, and we can use the constants to argue towards what God wants, if that makes sense. The fine-tuned argument works almost backwards, where it assumes what a God would want and then tries to argue towards a God existing, whereas the Thomist is going to argue first that God exists and then looks at the way that the world was created and then use those constants in the way that the world actually is to then try to argue towards what God wants.
So here's how you would do it. I got you. So here's how you do it. You'd say that if it's the case that God is all good, right? Goodness requires rational deliberate, like it requires agency, right? Because it's normative, right? You need something with free will to be able to choose from right and wrong, right? So you would expect to see that's this kind of life. To explain why God would desire rational creatures is because you can't have good things happen without rational beings with free will, at the very least.
But if rationality is not physical, or at least not,
sorry, I shouldn't have said rational. I should have said I meant beings with just free will.
Yeah, and that's contained within rationality for me, so I'm not taking it as a trip up. What I am saying is, Christianity holds to an almost dualistic view, because the rationality isn't just mind dependent, it's with the soul. So if the source of rationality is the soul, per the Christian view, and the soul is what gives the physical thing the ability to be rational. Because remember, we believe angels exist, and angels are rational, and angels have free will, but they don't have physical bodies. So we believe in this dualistic nature. Why humans specifically? Why not, as Dr. Blitz likes to say, why not make electrons that can love?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, you can make like, you could definitely make like in a world like electrons that are just in love, and you could make, like just like a space of like magical dust that doesn't have any like laws of physics. It's just like there are like souls in there and they interact and stuff. But like that, but like okay, now imagine all these worlds, right? Like all of these like possibilities. The idea is that on non-design, like there's only a couple of them that are like
And why couldn't it
not the
just
case.
been rolled and happened to be this way by chance? My point is the proper way to argue the fine tuning is the reverse that a lot of people want to do, at least from a Thomistic perspective, because you can't. Like, this actually was like a major point in the Catholic Church and was part of the condemnation of 1277, where effectively what you're doing is you're trying to argue that God necessarily had to create this way. And the church denies that. The church condemns that as a heresy. So it very well could have been the case that God could have created any particular way and in any different way. And that's what science is meant to find out, is how did God create? And from there, you go from, all right, so God created this particular way, and now that we know that God created this particular way, how does this accomplish a particular goal? How does this accomplish God's goal? So it's not that fine-tuning points to God, fine-tuning points towards the goal that God has.
Yeah, so a couple things like in the case of the electrons thing, I actually do like agree like all of these things like could actually happen like on the non-design hypothesis, which is the reason why like I that's kind of like my response to fine tuning, which is why I don't think it's actually successful. I'm not trying to argue that it's successful, but what they'll try to say, when people run the fine tuning argument, will try to say is that perfect being theism occupies a greater possibility space in the bare design.
Let me ask you this, because I do have to end, because I got to get some
Because of
dinner.
parsimony.
But is the reason why you like the fine-tuning argument because it's easy to LARP?
No.
Okay.
No. It's because the reason why I like it is it's not too ambitious. And I think it's just also just very like intuitively strong, powerful, right? Like like, oh yeah, I mean, it would be like if you grant everything, then yeah, I mean, like imagine you're an atheist, right? And you say, and then you have to say that it's more likely that God exists, but I don't believe in God. Like that doesn't make any sense.
I see how it can make sense. Like, it's more
I
likely
don't.
that, I mean, again, remember, it's more likely that the guy's a card shark based off of one deal, one shuffle. But I can still hold and be justified in holding that it was just a random chance.
I don't, unless justification is a normative relation between a reason and belief. So unless that person has a reason to think that it happened by chance, or like versus the other one, like, or some way to motivate the other one, well then he wouldn't be justified.
Well, because it's easy. It takes a lot of skill to be a card shark, so it's easier just based on one observation and knowing nothing else. It's more likely that the guy does not have the skill, and I just happen to get lucky.
Yeah, but then we're just calling into question like the odds there. But then you're just saying like, and that
goes into that second statement that I was talking about. You can make the odds say whatever you want.
Well, I don't really know if you could like make the odds say whatever you want in that case. Like you'd have to argue the odds there.
Well,
right? Like you have to say like motivate why one or the other.
The odds of him being a card shark. So what's more likely, that this man took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to learn how to cheat at cards, or just happen to get lucky? Like, you know nothing about me, right? Other than the fact that I'm Catholic and I like to go on lives and talk to people. And if I sat down with you and I shuffled a deck of cards in front of you and dealt out a perfect flush, based on that information alone, would you be willing to definitively say that I am a card shark?
I would probably say I'm more likely to believe that you are a card shark, yeah, because I think that the reason why I would say that is because talking about the hundreds of hours, I do know people like that.
Yeah.
Plenty of people exist like that, like they're magicians, right? Or like they do things like that. So I mean, yeah.
So here's the thing, you'd be wrong.
I mean, I might be wrong, but nonetheless, like we're talking about justification, not truth, right?
But here's the thing, is justification should lead you to truth. And sometimes the two positions, there's no way to definitively support one over the other. One is equally just, like you were justified to hold that I was a card shark, but people would also be equally justified to hold that I'm not a card shark because there isn't enough information to make to hold one position over the other, even though the odds of me being a card shark are higher based on that outcome. That's my point, is all we have is one outcome, the world being this particular way. So if you as you said, well, if I had hundreds of hands being dealt and all of them were flushes, then yeah, the person that holds that it was just random chance would be really unjustified in holding it, and I agree. But how many universes have we observed? Just the one.
So I don't think it really matters how many universes we observed. I think it. I don't. I think that it's rather like what are all the logical possibilities, and like what is the outcome that we ended up with, or epistemic possibilities.
To be able to say, to go back to the card shark example, in order to be able to say that, because like you said, oh no, I feel justified, and you are epistemically justified. But epistemic justification is basically taking a chance. The odds are more likely. It's not a truth claim. It's not claiming that it's true that I'm a card shark. But the odds are in favor, so I'm going to take this route.
Whereas the question is whether or not you're warranted in saying that. But regardless, but let's take the fantastic evidence for God, right?
And so we observed that fantastic evidence for God?
Well, no, but just imagine that we did, okay? Let's imagine that we observed that fantastic evidence for God, and then somebody comes up to you and says, well, we only have this one universe that we've ever observed, right? Like, maybe this happens whenever a universe reaches, like, X amount of years old, right? Like, this happens, right? Like, you would say, like, no, that's just absurd. You don't need to, like, observe the other universes to say that, like, some outcome is going to be less likely.
So here's the problem with that, though. Is you can't use that as evidence to support fine-tuning until that amazing theistic evidence has been shown. Otherwise, it's just what if pigs flew?
But I mean, like, sure. I mean, like, unless the evidence has been shown, sure. But like, you could show, like, at least that's what the fine-tuning argument tries to show, is that like, this outcome did happen. This like unexpected outcome did happen.
But that's not the
like
same
on natural sword.
But that's not the same. So an amazing outcome happened. The flush. The amazing theistic evidence would be the equivalent of him doing it 100 times, or even just, hi, I am Coolio the Magnificent Card Shark. But if that sign isn't there, and he's not dressed like a magician and is dressed in normal street clothes, and there is no amazing evidence to suggest that he even has this skill set, and it's just some random bum, how are you able to determine, other than just making an epistemic guess based on the statistics? And in either situation, you can be justified in picking one over the other.
Yeah, you always do that. I mean, I always do that, right? Like,
So-
you always go for that. You always say that. I mean, I always say that I believe the most likely thing at all points in time. So,
but the thing
yeah,
is
I would
that
say
like,
that.
so like for me personally, if I came across someone that, and I had no prior information to them, and I had no inclination that they had this skill set, and they shuffled out, just randomly shuffled in front of me and dealt out a deck of cards, and it was a royal flush, because I know that's statistically possible, and the likelihood of me meeting a person that has that skill set is low because it's a low skill set, then because I know it's possible for a flush to happen randomly, and I know the odds of me meeting a person with the skill set to do it on command is low, I take that into consideration, and I hold to the fact that, hey, maybe this person just got lucky. I might ask them to do it again to see if they can do it again, to further verify my position. But because I know the skill set required, and I know that it's a high ceiling, and I know the people with that skill set is low, not zero, but still low, the odds of me meeting a person with that skill set randomly is so low, while the odds of it happening randomly, while also low, it's still plausible and possible, that I would accept that position personally over the person being a card shark. And to me, the amazing theistic evidence equivalent would be seeing a sign or something before I even observe them shuffling that they are a magician or have something like that. And so, even though, like,
So I'm not really sure how that would be equivalent, because you're
So-
kind of just like in the case that you'd have evidence that somebody is the kind of thing that produces that result.
So
But I mean, I don't know, but like, regardless, well, okay. So in the case of the magician, I think that, like, if we're actually talking about like practicalities, it gets kind of difficult, like with the card shark one, because you're factoring in things like probability of outcomes, right? Like how long, how many people have there existed that have randomly shuffled a deck of cards, and what's the likelihood that at least somebody that's going to happen to at least someone, right? So I mean, you have to factor that in as well. You have to factor, like, there's a lot of like, you have to factor in like the probability of a human being a card shark, which actually I think is relatively like
it's
pretty like high.
It's
compared
higher
to
than
the other.
odds of it happening randomly. I do grant that, but it's still low.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's still low, but regardless, like, if you did work that out and you had like statistics about how many card sharks there are, you have like estimates about like how many times a deck of cards has been shuffled, right? Like, you estimate it, and like this is your best guess, and then it turns out to be that after you did all that work, right? After you've done all that work, you still realize that the probability of that happening is so unbelievably small compared to the probability of him being a card shark. I would say that you're justified in believing that he is a card shark, and you're probably unjustified in believing that he's not.
Okay. Has that been done for fine-tuning? Have all of those equivalent statistics been determined?
No, that's my response.
So that's why I don't like it, because the work hasn't been done.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that is the thing that makes it not successful. But I think what I do think is that proving something like that, or going about demonstrating that, I think is a lot easier of a methodology than
if we struggle
than
doing
proving that he's like analytically necessary.
if we struggle with that for
Logically necessary.
if we struggle with that for a card shark example, there's no way we're going to be able to do that for the universe.
Well, you haven't even started with the card shark example. Like, we need statistics on it.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is like, we at least know the odds of a particular arrangement for a deck of cards. We know that. And we can get rough estimates for the number of people in the world and the number of people with that skill. So those are easy. Like, that's just 3 statistics that we need. Or maybe the chances of you meeting one as well. So 4 statistics. And we can get rough enough estimates for all 4 of those. You and I haven't sat down and done it, but logicians and statisticians probably could sit down and figure out the odds for all four of these.
Yeah, I mean,
Universe
like
is a lot
as
more.
far as here's the thing though, like when it comes to odds, like you're kind of looking for. I mean, I would argue maybe like as far as the deck of cards one, it's with the whole like card shark one, getting those statistics is pretty difficult. But I would argue that getting finding the permutations of those constants is the same thing. It's basically the same methodology as looking at the different permutations of those decks of cards, right? Where you just say like, well, like all of the, this is the chance of like this happening on naturalism or something. Or like I could imagine you going about that, right?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Is like one Dr. Blitz has shown that maybe the constants don't actually exist.
Yeah, I do think that is actually a problem.
Yeah, like so, like, but that's my point. That's why I don't like the fine tuning argument, is because it's one. Let's say the constants did exist. There are so many other factors, including the fact that we only have one observation and there is no awesome theistic evidence, that it makes the numbers really hard to do outside of just vibes. And then for those that do try to do a serious attempt at it, the numbers are so hard to discover and maybe even don't even exist, that even though it's a lower barrier, I think it's actually harder in the attempt that it's trying to do so.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everything you're saying now, which is one of the reasons why I don't run like I'm not a theist, but I think I would argue that proving that God is logically necessary is way more ambitious than trying to do any of that.
It depends on your approach. Like trying to like the problem with the fine tuning, in my perspective, is it started too broad too quickly. But if I start with just I can observe something being dependent, and from the law of negation and the law of excluded middle, I can conclude that something is either dependent or it's not dependent. Now, I haven't established the existence of an independent thing, but I can know, thanks to the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, that something can either be only dependent or independent. And because I'm starting from a much smaller scale than trying to determine all of these different statistical factors, it's going to be an easier time for me.
Well, I think you're missing something. So when it comes to God's existence, to say that he's logically necessary is to mean that there's a contradiction in him not existing. Mm-hmm. That's the thing I'm saying is like too ambitious.
Well, I don't think so, because the thing is that people don't know what the nature of God is. So remember when I was talking about, if someone doesn't know what a bachelor is, would they see it as a contradiction to say this bachelor is married?
Well, no, if they don't know what it means.
Yeah, and that's my point. A lot of people don't have this misconception, even theists, on what the nature of God is. And if you don't know what the nature of God is, then how do you know that saying he doesn't exist entails a contradiction?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. That's my question.
So my argument is trying to show what the nature of God is, and then show that by denying the existence of that nature, it entails a contradiction. In the same way...
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is too ambitious, though.
I don't think... So basically what I'm trying to do is show that basically... So I say a bachelor exists and a bachelor is married. And you're like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And then someone else comes along and says, all right, you know what marriage is, right? It's when a man is married to a woman, or, another individual, right? And you go, yeah, okay, I understand that. And then they go, all right, so if someone is in that relationship, is it possible for them to not be in that relationship? Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so what is the term for someone that is not in that relationship? Well, I don't know. That is what is meant by a bachelor. Someone that is not in that relationship. So now you affirmed unknowingly someone that is in that relationship and not in that relationship. Oh, I see now how that's a contradiction. So that's what
Yeah.
my argument's trying to do is, okay, you say that God does not exist. Okay, well, let's first explore what it means to exist. And then continue on from there until we get to something that exists necessarily, where negating it, saying it does not exist, leads to a contradiction. And my answer, my view, and I know you disagree, and that's why I'm trying to frame the argument, because it's not, I don't think it's about the substance. I think it's about the way that it's presented at this point. Is it a contradiction to say existence doesn't exist? Yes, absolutely.
Wait, hold on. When you say existence, like you're treating it like a substance, something that exists.
But that's what I'm trying to show, is that existence is a substance. That if we look at the way reality is, it leads to the conclusion that existence is a substance. And if existence is a substance, then it cannot not exist.
I don't understand what it means for something to be a substance, but for that thing to not exist. So, like, if it's true that exist, hold on, no, I'm not saying you're saying that, but I'm saying that if you're committed to that, what that means is that if existence if existence exists, then presumably the existence has another substance called existence, and that substance has another substance called existence, and you get an infinite regress.
No.
That's so then when you say existence exists, when you say exists there, is exists a substance that existence has?
No. So what I'm saying.
Okay, so then you have a special plea.
No, what I'm saying is that eventually we get to a thing where the identity, that's what is meant by substance, is existence.
The substance is existence? Which is identity?
So substance is identity.
Okay, when you say identity, what do you mean?
I have a human identity. What I am is human.
Okay, so you're just saying that like every object is identical with like do you just mean essence?
Yes, like the substance is the actualization of an essence.
Okay.
So there exists a thing whose identity, whose essence / substance is existence. The best way I can put it is, are you able to describe what existence is? If you can, you have described its essence. To negate existence is to say that existence doesn't exist, which is a contradiction. So that's what
that's not a contradiction. Hold on. So like, okay. So when you say, are you familiar? So this gets into meta ontology. Are you familiar with meta ontology at all?
Somewhat, but I do have to go eat. I've actually been doing it.
It's okay.
If you want to,
but like, this is not like the only way to view like existence, like simply like as a substance.
No, I understand that. Like I understand that there are different views on this topic. That's why I'm trying to figure out a way to frame what I'm trying to say in a system that isn't dependent on a particular worldview.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. I don't really see how you get around, because everything you're saying just leads back to the fact that if something exists, then it has this thing called existence, and if existence is something that exists, and exists is to exist is to have a substance. There's this thing that existence has, which is like another substance.
Let me put it this way, and then I'm gonna have to get off.
Okay.
You have redness. Redness has an identity, a substance of what it is. Now, an apple is also red, or can be red. But the properties of the apple being that's red doesn't mean that red has those same properties as the apple. So, while existence has its own substance that is existence, that isn't to say that when I exist, that my existence is the same as that existence. Just like the apple being red is not the same as red simplicator, the nature of red.
Yeah,
So-
that's fine. But
So
that's not really.
I understand that this is an Aristotelian universalistic view that not everyone holds. I still think the truth being expressed in that terminology is universally true. I'm just trying to figure out a way to express that without it being tied up in that language, but that's the language I was introduced to it in. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to basically translate it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I don't see what you're saying really responds to the regress thing, but it's okay. We can call it for
Well,
now.
like I said, go to the my profile, check out that video that I was talking about that's pinned up, and you'll have a better idea on what I'm trying to approach it at. But it was great talking
Okay.
with you.
Yeah, you too, man.
Yep,
Yeah, have a great meal, dude.
you too.
All right, see you.
But yeah, I gotta get going. But thank you everyone for coming. You know, appreciate y'all for the support, and I will see y'all next time.